We have a need to search out our Hebraic roots to discover what truth has been altered. This intensive study, still in progress since 2007, has gathered scattered and hidden pearls of knowledge that prove to be truth and put them together in these series of teachings. Not everything that a particular ministry teaches is wrong, but on the other hand, neither is everything taught by man entirely correct, including my teachings. Only one, and that is Yeshua, was truth incarnate. His original words were entirely correct always. Not everybody has all the truth, but we are allowed to study, discern and glean the truth from those around us. Welcome to another lesson on deception, tithes. Temple tithes. The people tithed of their increase to the Levites, who tithed to the priests. The priest tithe, which was to provide for the poorest of the land, the Levite, those not otherwise provided for, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow, those without any other means or family to support them. The priests also received all the various offerings except those set aside for burnt offerings, etc. The leaders also tithed their taxes. The king's portion from his substance was for burnt offerings of the morning and of the evening and of the Sabbaths and of the new moons and of the appointed seasons. As only Levites have the right to receive tithe of the people, and since there is no temple in existence, and consequently no ordained Levites or priests serving in a temple, then a major factor in fulfilling exactly the laws of tithing does not exist in our modern world. But this is not an excuse. But there is a principle that can be followed to obtain the same blessings that was always available. As always noticed, the devil loves to take away blessings from us. He steals all our blessings. He doesn't want us to be blessed. He just wants us to suffer. Whereas Yahweh wants us to be blessed. So how do we get these blessings? Tithing, in fact, was in the beginning, before Moses and the temple. We read in Genesis 14:18-20. We're reading from the HRB, Hebraic Roots Bible. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High El. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High El, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High El, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, Abraham, gave him a tithe of all. So here we have a case, very early in the scriptures, where Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. He was the king of Salem, a priest of the Most High El. In Hebrews 7:1-6, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High Elohim, one meeting Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessing him, to whom also Abraham divided the tenth from all, first being interpreted king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, which is king of peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, nor beginning of days, nor having end of life, but like the son of Elohim. His priesthood remains forever. Now behold how great this one was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave tithes and paid head tax. So here we have a case, even confirmed by the New Testament, Brit Hadashah, that Melchizedek, priest of the Most High, was given a tithe from Abraham. And who was one of the people most blessed in this world? Abraham. Genesis 28, verse 20. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, and I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall Jehovah be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you shall give me, I will surely give the tenth to you. I think that's from the King James. So here's Jacob, again, before Moses and the law, is declaring to give God a tenth of all he has. And note it was all of all he had. Now, tithing under the Torah, the tithing system served a very useful purpose. It served to support the high priest and the tribe of Levi and their families. They had not been allocated a share of the land divided amongst the other tribes of Israel. Numbers 18:1. And Yahweh said to Aaron, You and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear the iniquity of the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear the iniquity of your priesthood. Numbers 18:6. And I, behold, I have taken your brothers the Levites from the midst of the sons of Israel, as a gift they are given to you by Yahweh, to do the service of the tent of meeting. Numbers 18:8-19. And Yahweh spoke to Aaron, saying, And I, behold, I have given to you the charge of my heave offerings, and of all the devoted things of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you for the anointing, and to your sons by a perpetual statute. This shall be yours of the most holy things from the fire, every offering of theirs, even every food offering of theirs, and even every sin offering of theirs, and every guilt offering of theirs, which they may render to me. It shall be the most holy to you and to your sons. And you shall eat it in the holy of holies, every male shall eat it, it shall be holy to you. And this is yours, the heave offering of their gift with all the wave offerings of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you, and to your sons and to your daughters, with you by a never-ending statute. Every clean one in your house shall eat it. All the best of all the oil, and all the best of the new wine and wheat, and the first fruits of them which they give to Yahweh I have given to you. The first fruits of all that is in their land which they bring to Yahweh shall be yours. Every clean one in your house shall eat it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Every one opening a womb of all flesh which they offer to Yahweh among man and among animal shall be yours. Only you shall certainly redeem the firstborn of man, and you shall redeem the firstlings of the unclean beasts. And their redeemed ones from a month old you shall redeem with your valuation of silver 5 shekels. By the shekel of the sanctuary it is 20 gerahs. But the firstling of an ox, the firstling of a sheep, or the firstling of a goat, you shall not redeem, they are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar, and you shall burn their fat as incense, a fire offering of soothing fragrance to Yahweh. And their flesh shall be yours, as the breast of the wave offering, and as the right leg it shall be yours. All the heave offerings of the holy things which the sons of Israel shall lift up to Yahweh, I have given to you and to your sons and to your daughters, with you by a never-ending statute. A covenant of salt it shall be forever before Yahweh to you and to your seed with you. So what the people gave to Yahweh as offerings, he gave to the priests to feed him and his family, support them. Numbers 18:21-24. And behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel to the sons of Levi for an inheritance in return for their service which they are serving, the service of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Israel shall not come near to the tent of meeting any more, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall do the service of the tent of meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a never-ending statute throughout your generations, that in the midst of the sons of Israel they shall have no inheritance. But the tithe of the sons of Israel shall they lift up to Yahweh, a heave offering I have given to the Levites for inheritance. Therefore I have said to them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel. So the Levites, those that worked in the service of the temple, received the tithe, which people had brought to Yahweh. He gave it to the Levites for their service, to feed them and their families. The tithe of the produce of the children of Israel given to the Levites was to be offered to the priesthood. So the Levites, they then tithed to the priests. Deuteronomy 14:22. Tithing, you shall tithe all the increase of your seed that the field yields year by year. Yahweh is alluding to the tithe of the tithe given by the Levites to the priesthood. This verse is not being directed towards the lay people of Israel. Once received, tithe is itself tithed upon the remaining 9/10. It is to be considered as if it was produce of the field. So when the Levite received the tithe from the people, that tithe was then considered as if they had produced it themselves in the fields. And then they would then tithe that to the priesthood. Numbers 18:25-28. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, And you shall say to the Levites, and you shall speak to them, when you take the tithe from the sons of Israel, which I have given to you from them for your inheritance, then you shall lift from it a heave offering of Yahweh, a tithe of the tithe. And your heave offering shall be counted to you as grain from the threshing floor, and as fullness from the winepress. So you also shall lift up the heave offering of Yahweh from all your tithe which you receive from the sons of Israel, and you shall give from it the heave offering of Yahweh to Aaron the priest. No. When reading Numbers 18:25-32, it seems to suggest tithes were offered to the non-priesthood Levites. However, we can see from the following text that the non-priesthood Levites could not receive the tithe of the children of Israel unless a Levite priest was present. Nehemiah 10:38. And the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites, tithing the Levites, and the Levites shall bring up the tithes of the tithe to the house of Elohim, to the rooms into the treasure house. Tithing in the farming communities. So there were communities outside Jerusalem, a long way away sometimes. In the outlying areas, the Levites received the tithe in the presence of a priest, and the Levites, who were the priests with the help of any assisting Levites, then brought only a tenth of the tithe up to Jerusalem. It was the priests living in the outlying areas of Israel which took the tenth of the tithe to Jerusalem. The tithe of the tithe was for the priesthood. Once the priesthood had themselves tithed, they were able to utilise the balance of the feast of the 7th month. They were permitted to convert some of it to cash, if otherwise unable to transport it to the place where Yahweh had placed his name. Tithing direct to Jerusalem. So if you're living in Jerusalem, 2 Chronicles 31:4-5, and he commanded the people, those who lived in Jerusalem, to give the portion of the priests and of the Levites, in order that they might be made strong in the law of Yahweh. And as the word spread, the sons of Israel brought abundantly the first fruits of grain, new wine and new oil and honey, and all of the produce of the field, and the tithe of all they brought very much. So basically the people in those days, they were farmers, producing crops, honey, fruit, milk, whatever, and that was like their income, and then they tithed that. Once the tenth of the tithe had been selected and offered, the remaining 9/10 of the tithe would be available to support the Levites. This 9/10 would be considered as if it was the produce of the threshing floor and winepress. Numbers 18:30-31. And you shall say to them, when you lift up its fat out of it, then it shall be counted to the Levites as increase of a threshing floor and as increase of a winepress. And you shall eat it in every place, you and your households, for it is your reward in return for your service in the tabernacle of the congregation. So it was not only for the priests or the Levites, it was also for their families. No, since much of the tithe of the tribes of Israel would have been presented outside of Jerusalem, where many of the Levites and priests dwelt, the redistribution of the 9/10 was minimised. For the tithe offered at Jerusalem, the priesthood was responsible for ensuring the Levites serving in Jerusalem received their due portion of the 9/10. Referring to Nehemiah 13:10. And I was aware that the portions of the Levites had not been given, for the Levites and the singers who did the work had each one fled to his field. So the priest's tithe that he got, he would then tithe his tithe, and that would help those Levites who were living in Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 14:23-27. And you shall eat before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he shall choose to cause his name to dwell there, Jerusalem, the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstlings of your herd and of your flock, that you may learn the fear of Yahweh your Elohim all your days. Skipping to verse 27. And you shall not forsake the Levite who is within your gates, for he has no portion nor inheritance with you. So here again he's talking to the priests. They were to use their tithe to help those Levites who were also working in Jerusalem. Tithe was usually not collected year round. The Old Covenant established 3 annual feasts, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering. These were celebrated in the 1st, 3rd and 7th months respectively. Around Jerusalem, the tithe was brought to Jerusalem from the 3rd month to the 7th month, i.e. from the 2nd feast to the 3rd feast. Exodus 23:14-17. 3 times in the year you shall make a feast to me. You shall keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I have commanded you, at the set time of the month of Aviv. For in it you came out from Egypt, and they shall not appear before me empty. Also the Feast of Harvest, the first fruit of your labour, of what you sow in the field. Also the Feast of Ingathering, after the going out of the year. At your gathering you'll work from the field. 3 times in the year every one of you who are male shall appear before the Adam Yahweh. So you had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Harvest, when they would start to harvest their fields, and the Feast of Ingathering, when they would gather it all together. So naturally, it's like their income was starting to come at the harvest time. As they'd harvest all their fields, that's when they'd get most of their, basically, what we call their income. 2 Chronicles 31:7. They began to lay the foundation of the heaps in the 3rd month, and in the 7th month they finished. So basically, in that 3rd month, Feast of Harvest, they would start to gather all their harvest in, and that's the time when they'd tithe of it. Outside of Jerusalem, the priests who lived in outlying areas would bring the 10th of the tithe to Jerusalem when they journeyed to the city to observe the Feast of the Harvest and the Feast of Ingathering. So basically the people would harvest all their crops, etc., gather it all together, then they'd tithe to the Levite and the priest who lived in their area, and then that priest, Levite, would then take a 10th of what they had and take it up to Jerusalem. Priest also tithed. Matthew 23:14. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour the houses of widows and pray at length as a pretext. Because of this you will receive more abundant judgment. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithes of mint and dill and cumin, and you have left aside the weightier matters of the Torah, judgment and mercy and faith. And these things were necessary for you to have done, and these things you should not have forgotten. The priestly tithe was later to be set aside in their cities and to be fully distributed to the poor. So basically the priesthood also had to tithe, and their tithe would help the poor and the Levite who had received nothing. Deuteronomy 14:28. This is slightly corrected. After 3 periods, 3 feasts, 2 of you shall bring forth all the tithe of your increase, and you shall lay it up within your gates. And the Levite, because he has no portion nor inheritance with you, and the alien, the fatherless, and the widow who are within your gates shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, so that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. So even here it's basically saying, as we tithe, Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do, so that you may prosper. Tithing, the blessing with tithing is a blessing in what you put your hands to do, your work. This is saying that at the end of the 7th month or 3rd feast, 2 people or groups would be responsible for distributing the Jerusalem storehouse tithe out to the other cities of the priests. Deuteronomy 26:12. When you have made an end of tithing of all the tithes of your increase, the 3rd part of the year is the 3rd month, the year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the alien, the orphan, and the widow, that they may eat inside your gates and be filled. The 3rd comes from the 3rd part. Scripture advises the tithe was composed of grain, wine, oil, and honey, plus all other produce of the land, plus other items from the land. 2 Chronicles 31:5. And as the word spread, the sons of Israel brought abundantly the first fruits of grain, new wine, and oil, and honey, and of all the produce of the field, and the tithe of all. They brought very much. The other items from the land included milk, curd, wool, and fleece. Numbers 13:27. And they reported to him and said, we came to the land where you sent us, and indeed it is flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Deuteronomy 18:4. The first of your grain, of your new wine, and of your oil, and the first of the fleece of your flock you shall give to him. The tithe was composed of the best of the land. All the best. Numbers 18:12. All the best of the oil, and all the best of the new wine and wheat, the first fruits of them which they give to Yahweh, I've given to you. Numbers 18:29-32. You shall lift up the whole heave offering of Yahweh out of all your gifts, all its fat, its holy part out of it. And you shall say to them, when you lift up its fat out of it, then it shall be counted to the Levites as increase of a threshing floor and as increase of a winepress. And you shall eat it in every place, and you and your households, for it is your reward in return for your service in the tabernacle of congregation. And you shall bear no sin because of it, since you have lifted it up from it, the best of it. And you shall not profane the holy things of the sons of Israel, so that you may not die. All the tithe received was from the children of Israel was initially holy. Leviticus 27:30. And all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, of the fruit of the tree shall belong to Yahweh. It is holy to Yahweh. For this reason, the tithe of the tithe could be called the tithe of holy things. 2 Chronicles 31:6. And the sons of Israel and Judah, those living in the cities of Judah, also they tithed of the herd and of the flock, even of the tithe of the holy things. And they were sanctified to Yahweh, the Elohim were brought in, and they gave heaps of heaps. Since the tithe retained its holy nature, it was important to store it separately from the other 9/10, which had become as the produce of the threshing floor and winepress. Now, when it talks about a tithe of the herd and the flock, for the normal people, it's not talking about you had to tithe your animals. It was basically talking about the produce that came from the herd and the flock, like milk, wool, a tithe of animals. It is commonly taught by those discussing the Old Covenant tithing system that the 12 tribes of Israel also tithed a tenth of their flock and herd. This confusion has arisen due to the following: 2 Chronicles 31:6, which talks about the tithe of oxen and sheep, and Leviticus 27:32-33, which mentions a tithe or a tenth of the herd and flock being considered holy. 2 Chronicles 31:4-9. And he commanded the people, those who lived in Jerusalem, to give the portion of the priests and of the Levites in order that they might be made strong in the law of Yahweh. And as the word spread, the sons of Israel brought abundantly the first fruits of grain, new wine, oil, and honey, and of all the produce of the field. And the tithe of all they brought very much. And the sons of Israel, Judah, those living in the cities of Judah, also they tithed of the herd and the flock, even a tithe of the holy things which they sanctified to Yahweh. The Elohim were brought in, and they gave heaps of heaps. They began to lay the foundation of the heaps in the 3rd month. In the 7th month they finished. And Hezekiah and the leaders came in and saw the heaps and blessed Yahweh and his people Israel. And Hezekiah asked the priests and Levites about the heaps. When one reads the text of these verses, it is quite apparent that neither live or dead animals will be just placed in a heap. It is also apparent that the context of this text is produce of the field. In other words, there is no suggestion animals were included. The tithe of the herd and flock they brought being advanced is the tithe of such produce as milk, butter and wool, products coming from the farmed animals which were not the animals themselves. Some verses which mention these products are Deuteronomy 18:4, and the first of your grain, of your new wine, and of your oil, and the first of the fleece of your flock shall give to him. Exodus 23:19. The first fruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Exodus 34:26. And you shall bring the first of the first fruits of your ground to the house of Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not boil a kid in the milk of its mother. Numbers 13:27. And they reported to him and said, we came to the land where you sent us, and indeed is flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Deuteronomy 32:14. Butter from cows and milk from the flock, with fat from the lambs and rams of the sons of Bashan, and he-goats, with the fat of the kidneys of wheat and of the blood of the grape you shall drink wine. Isaiah 2:9. So I will return and take my grain in its time and my wine in its season. I will take back my wool and my flax she uses to cover her nakedness. Leviticus 27:32-33. And all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, of the fruit of the tree shall belong to Yahweh. It is holy to Yahweh. And if a man really redeems any of his tithes, he shall add its fifth to it. And all the tithe of the herd and the flock, all that passes under the rod, a tenth shall be holy to Yahweh. Now, we're going to talk about under the rod. A tenth shall be holy to Yahweh. Verse 33. He shall not search whether it is good or bad, nor shall he change it. And if he at all changes it, then it shall be that its substance shall be holy, it shall not be redeemed. At first, this verse seems to be the one verse which clearly confirms the existence of a tithe of the herd and flock. It is strange, however, that in respect to tithing, the thought of your grain, new wine and oil is commonly encountered, referred to Deuteronomy 14:23, 2 Chronicles 31:5, Nehemiah 10:37-39. But only in this verse do we encounter a tithe of the herd of the flock. The answer lies in the alternative meaning of the Hebrew for rod, Strong's 7626, which is sometimes translated scepter. Example, Genesis 49:10. What Leviticus 27:32 is saying is that when a king ruled over the children of Israel, he would have to tithe upon the herd and flock he collected through taxation. We find examples of this occurring in practice. So basically the word rod is scepter, and so it's talking about the king's tax. He had to tithe of his tax, which would have included the animals that people had given him for tax. 2 Chronicles 30:24. And Hezekiah the king of Judah had lifted up to the congregation 1,000 young bulls and 7,000 sheep. And the leaders had lifted up to the congregation 1,000 young bulls and 10,000 sheep, and the priests had sanctified themselves in abundance. 2 Chronicles 31:3. And the king's portion from his substance was for burnt offerings of the morning and of the evening, and the burnt offerings of the Sabbaths and of the new moons and the appointed season. It was written in the Torah of Yahweh. So it was the king who had to supply the burnt offerings of the morning and the evening and of the Sabbaths. So the burnt offerings basically didn't come from the people. 2 Chronicles 35:7. And Josiah lifted up to the sons of the people a flock of lambs and young goats, all for Passover offerings for everyone who was found, to the number of 30,000 and 3,000 oxen. And these were from the king's substance. Note, this tithe of animals was received from the king at Passover and also gradually through the year. So basically it was the king, out of his tax, who supplied all the animals. Animals were also supplied by the leaders. Refer to Chronicles 30:24 and 2 Chronicles 35:8. From 2 Chronicles 35:8 to 9, it is apparent that the leaders mentioned here were those of the priests and Levites, those who would have had responsibility over the firstlings. The Lord predicted in advance that the children of Israel would request to have a king over them. Refer to Deuteronomy 17:14 to 20. And Yahweh later decreed that the king would tax them at a rate of 10%. Refers 1 Samuel 8:15 to 17. In 1 Samuel 8:15 to 17 says, and he will tithe your seed and your vineyards, and he will give them to his eunuchs and to his servants. And he will take your male slaves and your slave girls and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and will use them for his own work. He will tithe your flock, and you will be servants to him. From this 10% tax the king was under, Leviticus 27:32 required to tithe 10%. Thus 1 in every 100 newborn animals, firstborn excluded, will be used to meet the offerings needed of the tabernacle. Ezekiel 45:9 to 17, so says Adonai Yahweh, enough for you, O rulers of Israel, turn away violence and oppression, and do justice and righteousness. Lift away your acts of violence from my people, declares Adonai Yahweh. Down to verse 13. This is the heave offering that you shall offer, the sixth of an ephah of a homer of wheat, and the sixth of an ephah of a homer of barley, and the statute of oil, the bath of oil, the tenth of the bath out of the core, 10 baths a homer, for 10 baths are a homer, and 1 lamb out of the flock, out of 200, out of the watered land of Israel, for a food offering, and for a burnt offering, and for a peace offering, to atone for them, declares Adonai Yahweh. All the people of the land shall be at this heave offering for the prince in Israel, and responsibility for burnt offerings shall be on the prince. So the prince, leader, the king, had to supply all the burnt offerings. And a food offering and a drink offering in the feasts, and on the new moons, and on the Sabbaths, in all appointed feasts of the house of Israel. He shall make the sin offering, and the food offering, and the burnt offering, and the peace offering, to atone for the house of Israel. Since the king also claimed 10% of the produce of the field, he was also required to give to the tabernacle a tithe of this also. By returning 10% of his tax to the tabernacle for the offerings, the king was effectively returning back to the people 100th of the land's produce. Nehemiah 5:11. Now even today, give back to them their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, also the 100th part of their silver, of their grain, the wine, and the oil that you have taken from them. Note, the oil provided by the prince of Israel, Ezekiel 45 verse 9, was to be 1 part in 100th, 1/10 of a bath from 10 baths. In respect to the grain, the value of a sixth is not so much a ratio, but a reference to the sixth of an ephah. The prince was to offer every morning. Refer Ezekiel 46:14. So the offerings that went to the priests, Numbers 18:8-19. So the priests received food offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, heave offerings, wave offerings, the first fruit, all those in their land, every devoted thing, every one opening a womb of all flesh. Among man and among animals, you shall certainly redeem the firstborn of man, and you shall redeem the firstlings of the unclean beasts, and their redeemed ones from a month old, and you shall redeem with your valuation of silver 5 shekels, by the shekel of the sanctuary is 20 gerahs. So that is just the offerings that the priests received, not the tithes, just offerings. But the firstling of an ox, or the firstling of a sheep, or the firstling of a goat, you shall not redeem. They are holy, and their flesh shall be yours as the breast of the wave offering, and as the right leg it shall be yours. Now note about the first fruits. Some people sometimes abuse this offering of first fruits. Leviticus 23:10. Speak to the sons of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I am giving to you, and have reaped its harvest, and have brought in the omer of the beginning of your harvest to the priest. So the omer is defined as, here in H6016, a sheaf, or also an omer. So it's just a sheaf, a measure. It wasn't a tenth, it was just basically a sample of the harvest. Deuteronomy 26:2. Then you shall take of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you shall bring in from your land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving to you, and you shall put it in a basket. So how big is a basket? A basket is something you carry, it's not much. And you shall go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim shall choose to cause his name to dwell there at Jerusalem. So the first fruit basically was not 1/10, it was basically a sample. Honour Yahweh with your substance and with your first fruits of all your increase. And your barns shall be filled with plenty, and your wine vats shall burst with new wine. A liberal definition of first fruits would include the first of most anything, including the first part of one's income. However, the scripture restricts the definition of first fruits when associated with offerings to only food. Offerings of first fruits consisted of grains, grapes and wine made therefrom, olives and olive oil made therefrom, and from other crops that come from the ground or soil. So really you cannot define the first fruit as the first fruits of your income. It was basically to do with the farmers, what they were producing, and they would bring a sample of that crop, etc., to Yahweh. Not this income, not the sample of your income. First fruit offerings always came from the miracle of God, or from that which was produced by God. Man cannot produce crops, man can only harvest the crops that God produces and gives to us. In Deuteronomy 8:18, God tells us that he gave man the ability to produce wealth. In other words, God gives us the ability to work and earn a living. We earn that income from our labour. Our labour is not holy. First fruit offerings only came from God's labour and never man's labour. Saying that the first part of one's income is the first fruits is not biblical. It fits the definition of first fruits, but not the biblical context relating to offerings. So I'm afraid some people use this first fruits of your income basically to increase their income. Now, another way was the treasury for Yahweh's house. So how do we build Yahweh's house? Basically not from tithes and offerings. Mark 12:41. And sitting down opposite the treasury, Yeshua watched how the crowd threw copper coins into the treasury, and many rich ones threw in much. 2 Kings 12:9-11. And Jehoiada, the priest, took a chest and cut a hole in its lid and put it near the altar, on the right side as one comes into the house of Yahweh, and the priest who kept the door put in all the silver brought into the house of Yahweh. And it happened when they saw that the silver in the chest was plentiful, that the scribe of the king and the high priest went up, and they bound it up, and they counted the silver found in the house of Yahweh. And they weighed silver into the hands of those doing the work, those overseeing the house of Yahweh, And they gave it, weighed it out to the craftsmen in wood and to the builders who were working on the house of Yahweh. So the principle to build a church, to build the house of Yahweh, is basically a separate collection. It is not from the tithes, it is not from the offerings. Now the curse, if you don't tithe, don't offer. Malachi 3:6-12. For I am Yahweh, I do not change. Because of this, you sons of Jacob are not destroyed. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes, and you have not kept them. Return to me, and I'll return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you say, in what shall we return? Will a man rob Elohim? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what have we robbed you? In the tithe and the offerings. You are cursed with a curse for the nation, all of you, you are robbing me. So basically not tithing and offering, we're robbing Yahweh, and we will receive a curse. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. And test me now with this, says Yahweh of hosts, whether I will not open the windows of the heavens for you and pour out a blessing until there is no sufficiency of room to store it. So there's a blessing and a curse. A curse if we don't tithe, and a great blessing if we do tithe and offer. And I will rebuke the devourer for you, and he shall not destroy the fruit of your ground against you, nor shall your vine miscarry against you in the field, says Yahweh of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a delightful land, says Yahweh of hosts. So there's a great blessing from tithing and offering, in whichever way we intend to do it. If we don't give, we'll never get blessed. And the devourer will come and devour what we have. Exodus 23:15, Scriptures 1998. Guard the festival of unleavened bread. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Mitzrayim. And do not appear before me empty-handed. Now here's another interesting thing, when we come before Yahweh, especially on the feast, especially the Feast of Unleavened Bread, do not appear before me empty-handed. Summing up, temple tithes. The people tithe of their increase to the Levites, who tithe to the priests. The priest tithe, which to provide for the poorest of the land, the Levite, those not otherwise provided for, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow, those without any other means or family to support them. The priests also received all the various offerings, except those set aside for burnt offerings, etc. The leaders also tithed their taxes. The king's portion from his substance was for burnt offerings, of the morning and the evening, and of the Sabbaths, and of the new moons, and of the appointed seasons. As only Levites have the right to receive tithe of the people, and since there is no temple in existence, and consequently no ordained Levites or priests serving in a temple, then a major factor in fulfilling exactly the laws of tithing does not exist in our modern world. But there is a principle that can be followed. Plus, if we remember, even before the temple tithe system, Abraham tithed, Jacob tithed, most of those other people tithed because they knew how to get blessed. Now looking at the New Testament, Brit Hadashah, what does it say? Luke 16:10-15. He faithful in the least is also faithful in much, and he unrighteous in the least is also unrighteous in much. Then if you were not faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will entrust the true riches to you? So if you're not faithful in your mammon, money, income, he will not trust you with the true riches. Now what are true riches? Let's read on. If you are not faithful in that of another, who will give to that to which is yours? No servant is able to serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and he will love the other, or he will cling to one and he will despise the other. You are unable to serve Yahweh and wealth. So by giving, we're basically not serving wealth. If you can't give, that means you're serving money, you're serving wealth. And being lovers of money, the Pharisees also heard all these things and they mocked him. And Yeshua said to them, you are those justifying yourselves before men, but Yahweh knows your hearts. For the thing highly prized among men is abominable before Elohim. Interesting, it's all to do with the heart. Tithing and offering is to show what sort of a heart we have. Is our heart just for wealth, money, prosperity, or is our heart for Yahweh? What's our God? Money or Yahweh? Colossians 1:24-29. And now rejoice in my sufferings on your behalf, and fill up in my flesh the things lacking of the afflictions of Messiah on behalf of his body, which is the congregation, of which I became a minister according to the stewardship of Elohim given to me for you to preach the word of Yahweh everywhere, even the mystery of having been hidden from the ages and from the generations, but now is revealed to his saints, to whom Yahweh willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of his mystery among the nations, which is Messiah in you, the hope of glory. So this scripture here gives us a definition of the true riches. And the true riches basically is the Messiah, him in us, the anointing. Him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may cause every man to become perfect in Messiah Yeshua. And to this end I also labour, struggling according to the working of him who works in me in power. So the true riches, the thing we desire the most, is Yahweh Yeshua living within us, his spirit within us, the anointing within us. Messiah is the anointed one. We need that anointing. Luke 11:42, but woe to you Pharisees, because you tithe mint and dill and every herb, and you pass over the justice and love of Elohim. Now these things were necessary for you to have done, while not forsaking these other things. So he was not against them tithing. They had to do it. But there are sometimes things more important. Tithe and offering, a minimum requirement versus the maximum. So tithing basically, and tithing and offering is basically the minimum we should be doing. But the New Testament church, they did even more. Acts 2:44-46. And all the believers were echad, that's one, and had all things in common. And they sold possessions and goods and distributed to them all according to as anyone had need. And continuing steadfastly with one mind day by day in the sanctuary, and breaking bread from house to house, they shared food in gladness and simplicity of heart. So the New Testament church, basically, they gave everything. They shared everything with everybody. 1 Timothy 5:17-18. Let the elders who minister well be counted worthy of double pay, especially those labouring in the word and doctrine. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox treading out the grain, and labourers worthy of his pay. So the early church, they knew that the elders, those who were ministering, especially ministering in the word and doctrine, really deserved double pay. 1 Corinthians 9:13-14. Do you not know that those labouring about the holy things are maintained out of the sanctuary? Those ministering on the altar partake with the altar. So also the Master ordained that those who preach his good news should live from his good news. Galatians 6:6-10. But let the one being taught in the word share with the one teaching in all good things. Do not be deceived, Yahweh is not mocked, for whatever a man may sow, that he also will reap. For the one sowing to his flesh will reap corruption of the flesh, but the one sowing to the Spirit will reap everlasting life from the Spirit. And let us not be weary now that we are working for good, for in the season of reaping we will not faint. So then, as we have opportunity, let us work good towards all men, especially towards the sons of the household of faith. So it's quite clear that those who preach the word, study the word, should be supported. And that's probably where our tithes should go. Just like the Old Testament, they supported the priest, the Levite, the teachers, the rabbis with their tithe. Free will offering, 2 Corinthians 9:6-11. But remember this, the one sowing sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one sowing generously will also reap generously. Each one as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or out of necessity, for Yahweh loves a cheerful giver. And Yahweh is able to make all grace to abound towards you, that in everything always, having all self-sufficiency, you may abound to every good work, even as has been written, he has distributed liberally, he has given to the poor, his righteousness abides forever. Now he that supplies seed to the sower and bread for eating, may he supply and multiply your seed and increase the fruit of your righteousness. In everything you being enriched to all sincerity, which works out thanksgiving to Yahweh through us. So again, in great blessings in giving, even the free will offering. Measured out, Luke 6:38. Given it, we're given to you in good measure and pressed down and abundant, or pour into your robe in that measure. For the measure which you measure it will be measured to you. So how generous are you? Yahweh will pay you back. Missions. Philippians 4:15-19. And you know too, Philippians, that in the beginning of the good news, when I went out from Macedonia, not one congregation shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. Because even at Thessalonica you sent more than once to meet my needs. I do not say this because I seek a gift, but I seek the fruit of the good news multiplying to you. But I have all things and more than enough. I have been filled, receiving from Epaphroditus the things from you, and it was welcomed as a fragrant perfume, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to Yahweh. And my Elohim will fill your every need according to his riches in glory in Messiah Yeshua. So you want every need met? Then give to those doing missionary work. But we must make sure we plant in good ground. Matthew 13:8. And others fell on the good ground and yielded fruit. Indeed, one 100-fold and one 60 and one 30. We have to check out who we're giving to. Is this going into good ground? Is this going to bring people to Yahweh? Acts 4:34-37. There was no man among them who was lacking, for those who had possessed fields and houses would sell them and brought the price of whatever was sold, and laid them at the feet of the apostles. It was distributed to each according to as any had need. And Joseph, the one surnamed Barnabas by the apostles, which been translated as son of comfort, a Levite, a Cypriot by race. The field being his, selling it, he brought the proceeds and placed them at the feet of the apostles. So there we have it. So there's a principle we can follow, that as we give, especially to Yahweh's work, we're going to be abundantly blessed and devour. The minimum is a tithe. Maximum you can go. Well, I really believe you're to be led by the Spirit. As the Spirit leads, you offer, give to mission work, plant your seed in good ground. If we don't, the devourer will devour what we have. Things will break down, investments will go bad, we'll lose what we have. But if we tithe and offer and give, we'll be blessed. And I strongly believe a tithe is the absolute minimum. All the tithe basically does is to rebuke the devourer. The windows of heaven are not opened until we give, and give with a heart. We've got to be happy when we give. If we're otherwise, we'll not be blessed. Yahweh loves a cheerful giver. So I hope you've learned something. I hope you'll be blessed. Thank you. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.